Welcome to another video. Today I'm going to be talking about the African American history. I'm going to say the year and what happened in that year. I'm starting from the Civil Rights Act of 1875 all the way to the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. Let's begin. 1875, the Civil Rights Act. It means that all races within the jurisdiction of the United States will be treated equally in all places of amusement like amusement parks and service like restaurants. 1900, Black National Anthem. On November 1, 1900, brothers James Weldon Johnson, author, educator, and General Secretary of the NAACP, and John Rosamond Johnson composed the song Lift Every Voice and Sing. It's commonly referred to as the Black National Anthem. 1909, the NAACP is established, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, usually abbreviated as NAACP, formed in 1909. Its mission is to ensure political, educational, social, and economic equality of rights of all people and eliminate racial hatred and racial discrimination. Also 1909. First African American reaches the North Pole. On April 6, 1909, Matthew Henson became the first man to reach the North Pole. Admiral Robert E. Perry, the expedition's commander, arrived about 45 minutes after Henson. The temperature was 29 degrees when Henson planted the American flag at 90 degrees north, the only place on the planet where the only way you can go is south. 1910 to 1920. The Great Migration begins. Looking for better opportunities, massive numbers of African Americans moved to the north to seek employment in factories. The trend won't slow down until the 1960s and may start to reverse in the 2000s. March of 1912, first African American pilot. Emory Malik was the first African American pilot. Also 1912, Father of the Blues produces his first big hit. W.C. Handy publishes his song Memphis Blues, which becomes a huge hit. March 10, 1913, Harriet Tubman dies. Born into slavery, Harriet Tubman served as a conductor with the Underground Railroad, leading countless slaves to freedom. For her help during the Civil War as a nurse, cook, and spy, she was awarded full military honors upon her death in Auburn, New York. 1917, East St. Louis race riots. 40 African Americans and 8 whites are killed in race riots in East St. Louis, stirred up by white resentment of African American histories working in the wartime industry. May 15, 1918, Henry Johnson wins Croix de May 15, 1918, Henry Johnson wins Croix de Guerre, Guerre, in World War. Kept on the sidelines by the U.S. Army, Henry Johnson and Needham Roberts join the Harlem Hellfighters and fight for the French Army. Attacked by a platoon of German soldiers in the Argonne Woods. Running out of grenades, running out of bullets, his rifle splintered. Johnson fights with a bolo knife to save his comrade Roberts from being captured until reinforcements arrive, receiving 21 separate wounds. For their heroic actions, both Johnson and Roberts were awarded Croix de Guerre, Guerre, France's highest military honor. Johnson received an additional coveted gold palm for extraordinary valor. Years later, the U.S. belatedly awarded Johnson a Purple Heart, Distinguished Cross, and Medal of Honor. 1920, the 19th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. This means that the right of the citizens to vote shall not be denied or abridged because you're not a man or on account of your gender. August 1936, Jesse Owens wins 4 gold medals at the Berlin Olympics. On August 3, 1936, at the Olympic Games in Berlin, Germany, Jesse Owens won the 100-meter sprint, capturing the first of his 4 gold medals. Over the next 6 days, Owens won Olympic gold in the 200-meter dash, the broad jump, and the 400-meter relay. April 9, 1939. Marian Anderson performs at the Lincoln Memorial. When the Daughters of the American Revolution denied Anderson the opportunity to sing at an integrated audience at Constitution Hall, First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt resigned from the DAR and invited her to perform at the Lincoln Memorial on Easter Sunday. Her first song was My Country 'Tis of Thee. March 26, 1941. Eleanor Roosevelt climbs into an airplane with Tuskegee flight instructor. No one expected Eleanor Roosevelt, America's First Lady, to get into a small plane with an African-American pilot. Those kinds of events didn't happen in the early spring of 1941. 1946. Executive Order 9808. First President's Committee on Civil Rights established. On December 5, 1946, President Harry S. Truman signed Executive Order 9808. This landmark order established the First President's Committee on Civil Rights, charged with examining law enforcement agencies and government systems to determine how their means of safeguarding the civil rights of Americans could be improved and strengthened. The committee was ordered to report their findings to the President in writing. April 15, 1947. Breaking the color line in baseball. When Jackie Robinson stepped into the Ebbets Field on April 15, 1947, Robinson became the first African American in the 20th century to play baseball in the major leagues. Breaking the color line, a segregation practice dating to the 19th century. Jackie Robinson was an extremely talented multi-sport athlete and a courageous man who played an active role in civil rights. 1948. Executive Order 9981. Desegregation of the Armed Force. On July 26, 1948, President Harry S. Truman signed this executive order establishing the President's Committee on Equality of Treatment and Opportunity in the Armed Services, committing the government to integrating the segregated military. 1950. Ralph Bunche, first African-American recipient of the Nobel Peace Prize. On September 22, 1950, Ralph J. Bunche was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for his role as mediator in the Palestinian conflict. Bunche was the first African-American Nobel Peace Prize recipient. May 17, 1954. Brown versus the Board of Education. In this milestone decision, the Supreme Court ruled that separating children in public schools on the basis of race was unconstitutional. It signaled the end of legalized racial segregation in the schools of the United States. December of 1955. Rosa Parks at the Montgomery bus boycott. May 26, 1956. Althea Gibson, first African-American tennis champion. Taking up tennis at the age of 14, Gibson would go on to win 5 Grand Slams, including the U.S. Open twice and the Wimbledon twice. Passes Congress. 1960, Greensboro Woolworth sit-in. On Monday, February 1, 1960, at 4:30 p.m., 4 freshmen from North Carolina Agricultural and Technological College, Ezell Blair Jr. David Richmond, Joseph McNeil, and Franklin McCain sat down at the lunch counter at the local F.W. Woolworth store and ordered coffee and cherry pie. This simple act was extremely bold for the times. These African-American students who were acting in defiance of Jim Crow's laws that permitted blacks to shop in the store but not eat a meal there. The Greensboro sit-in is credited with reigniting the civil rights movement in America, transforming the older generation's don't rock the boat tactics to a more militant, protest-based platform. 1961. Freedom Riders fight segregation across the South. 13 members of the Congress of Racial Equality, CORE, set off on a bus ride from Washington, D.C. to New Orleans on May 4, 1961. These civil rights activists were testing a 1960 Supreme Court ruling that expanded anti-discrimination laws covering interstate travel to include facilities used by travelers. The Freedom Riders bravely entered segregated terminals, waiting rooms, restrooms, and restaurants. They were met with harassment, violence, and even arrest. 1963. Birmingham Campaign and Church Bombing. The Birmingham Campaign was launched in 1963. Martin Luther King Jr. and other activists were soon jailed, but it was the participation of the children that advanced the momentum of the Birmingham movement. They marched alongside the adults and were taken to jail with them as well. Because the 16th St. Baptist Church was close to the downtown area, it was an ideal location to hold rallies and meetings. On Sunday morning, September 15th, 1963, dynamite was planted by the Ku Klux Klan, exploded in the building. Under the fallen debris, the bodies of 4 girls were found. Denise McNair, Addie Mae Collins, Carol Robertson, and Cynthia Wesley died because of the color of their skin. 1963, the Equal Pay Act. That means that you can't change the pay of somebody because they're a different gender. Like if you're a guy, you get more money. That's not allowed anymore. So now it all has to be equal if you're doing the same job. August 28, 1963. Martin Luther King Jr. delivers I Have a Dream in Washington, D.C. Thanks to the power of TV and radio, Martin Luther King Jr.'s speech at the end of the march on Washington was broadcast around the world. 1964. The Civil Rights Act of 1964. This act, signed into law by President Lyndon Johnson on July 2, 1964, prohibited discrimination in public places, provided for the integration of schools and other public facilities, and made employment discrimination illegal. Malcolm X assassinated. On February 21, 1965, Malcolm X was assassinated while speaking at a rally of the Organization of Afro-American Unity, OAAU. at the Audubon Ballroom in New York City. Malcolm X was a charismatic speaker and disciplined leader who quickly rose to prominence through his association with the Nation of Islam. 1965, the Voting Rights Act. This act was signed into law on August 6 of 1965 by President Lyndon Johnson. It outlawed the discriminatory voting practices adopted by many southern states after the Civil War, including literacy tests as prerequisite to voting. 1967, Thurgood Marshall. He was the first black appointed to the United States of America Supreme Court, August 13, 1967. Spent his life battling for civil rights, winning 29 out of 32 court cases before ever serving on the Supreme Court. 1967, Loving versus Virginia. It removes race-based restriction on marriage. And now the last one. 1968, Martin Luther King Jr. assassinated. On April 4, 1968, Martin Luther King Jr. was shot outside of his room at the Lorraine Motel in Memphis, Tennessee. King's assassination precipitated to marches and rallies across America, and riots erupted in over 100 cities. In the melee, 46 people were killed and 20,000 arrested. From April 5 to 11, there were 50,000 federal and state troops called in to keep order. President Lyndon B. Johnson declared April 7 an official day of mourning. King was 38 years old at the time of his death. This was Sai. Hi, I'm Sai, and thank you for watching this video. I hope you liked it. Okay, bye!